Well, as I predicted, today was a lot quieter than day one of the legal tampering period. Having said that, quiet can be a good thing, especially when it comes to one man in particular. Welcome everybody to JJ9 News, where we talk all things NFL all the time. I'm Jaguars representing the 904 from the 602, and today we are talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars. I want to break down in one giant video everything that happened with Jacksonville on day 2 of the legal tampering period, one day before the start of the new league year officially at 4 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. A lot of news to cover, even though it was way quieter than it was on day 1, when the Jags got a bunch of new players like Mitch Morse, like Darnell Savage, like Gabe Davis, like Devin Duvernay, like Ronald Darby. Not a lot of moves the Jags made today, but that's not the worst thing in the world. There's 4 major topics to talk about with Jacksonville. You can probably guess what the final one is going to be regarding Calvin Ridley. But I want to start off with the one move they did make today, and that was getting running back D'Ernest Johnson to re-sign with the team. Last season, played 17% of the snaps on offense, gives the Jags some depth at that position. Honestly, I gotta be honest, I'm not too crazy about this move. Because if you look at how Trent Baalke constructs his roster, look at how Doug Peterson constructs the 53-man roster. The Jaguars carry 3 running backs on the 53 when all is said and done. In 2022, the season started with James Robinson, Travis Etienne, and Snoop Conner. By the end of the season, Robinson was on the New York Jets, but they ended with 3 running backs, just replaced him with Jermichael Hasty. 2023, same thing. They carry 3 running backs the whole season. Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, the 3rd-round pick out of Auburn, and D'Ernest Johnson. So they carry 3 running backs on the roster, but none of them really address what the Jags need right now, and that's a 3rd-down pass-catching back. Obviously, Travis Etienne is phenomenal. He's a great pass-catching back, but Doug Peterson wants to limit the amount of reps he has, the amount of snaps he takes, which is understandable. You don't want to wear and tear your running back. You don't want to give him too much of a workload. You want to be able to rotate him in and out. Tank Bigsby is not that guy from a pass-catching 3rd-down standpoint. Never has been, probably never will be. Only had 1 catch last year, call it 25% of targets thrown its way. That was it. We saw his stone-cold hands on display in week 1 in that game against the Indianapolis Colts. Remember, Trevor Lawrence hit Tank Bigsby in the hands, and it went off his hands, and it was an interception. He never had 200-plus yards receiving in a single year at Auburn. And D'Ernest Johnson is not that as well. Only 10 catches last year, didn't really do a whole lot in that pass-catching department on 3rd down, and he's not the best runner in the world. Just 2.6 yards per carry, nothing of note in the ground game, no real big explosive runs, no runs of 20-plus yards. Granted, the offensive line was not that good last year, but still a bit alarming in that regard. I don't agree with the decision to run it back at running back. If the Jags draft a running back on day 3, it might be a waste of a pick because, like I said, how Doug Peterson and Trent Baalke construct the roster, you're keeping 3 backs. Obviously, Travis Etienne is going to be on the team. Tank Bigsby, I'm assuming, is going to be on the team. For as much as I bashed Tank Bigsby, and rightfully so, I thought the final month of the season, he looked like he was coming on. He had some nice runs in that game against Carolina, nice runs up the middle. He's a bit of a bulldozer. He's a bit of a tank in some regards. If you use him up the middle, he can be that bruiser. He can be that up-the-middle kind of back. He's not the pass-catching back, but he's the up-the-middle back. D'Ernest Johnson, I don't really know where he fits in, especially if you draft a running back day 3. One of them is not making the roster. Now, granted, if D'Ernest Johnson's contract gives an easy out, it's a 1-year deal. If there's no dead cap whatsoever, I have no problem with this move. I want to make that very clear. If this is just an insurance move and the Jaguars draft a running back day 3 and it means nothing in terms of whether or not they're going to make the roster because Johnson's on the bubble, I have no problem with this move. If this carries any dead cap, this is a bad move if the Jags do end up cutting D'Ernest Johnson before the start of the 2024 season. I don't really see how this makes the team any better. I really don't. I don't see where D'Ernest Johnson fits in. He's not a replacement for Etienne, not a replacement for Bigsby, and he's not what the Jags need as a 3rd-down running back. So I'm not crazy about this move, but then again, 1-year deal, if there's no dead cap, I've got no problem with it. We'll see if that adjusts Jacksonville's line of thinking in the draft, whether they do take a running back in day 3. They've drafted a running back each of the last 2 years with Doug Peterson, Snoop Conner in 2022, Tank Bigsby 2023. We'll see what happens in 2024. Moving on to the next item of note, no kicker news. No kicker news whatsoever today, not just for Jacksonville, but around the NFL. Outside of John Parker Romo, who was with the San Antonio Brahmas in the XFL last season, got a tryout with the Detroit Lions, was competing, oddly enough, with Riley Patterson for the starting job in Detroit lost out to Patterson. He is now signed with the Minnesota Vikings. Outside of that, nothing happened today from the kicker department. And that's big because Jacksonville badly needs a kicker. We don't know what direction they're going to go in. We don't know if they're going to sign a free agent. Don't know if they're going to draft a guy, which I'm very, very weary about because you look at the 3 guys that got drafted last year, it's a bit of a crapshoot drafting a kicker. Anders Carlson might not be on the team next year. Chad Riley might not be on the team next year. Jake Moody, very, very inconsistent. Not my favorite kicker in the world, and that was a 3rd-round pick. They might go undrafted route. They might go the UFL route. We don't know what the Jaguars are going to do with kicker. We don't know where their headspace is. Having said that, no big free agent kickers have gone off the board today. Will Lutz, obviously the Jags tried to get him on Monday, had him to a 3-year deal, decided to go back to Denver, take less years, 2-year deal, wanted to play with Sean Payton, stay in Denver, not move for the 3rd time. It will be a year since he was on New Orleans to start off the 2023 preseason. So I get the move. Can't blame Trent Baalke for that. Jaguars do need a kicker. Obviously, they're not going to go with Riley Patterson into 2024 as their primary guy. They made that very clear with the fact that they gave Will Lutz a 3-year contract, and they thought they had that wrapped up. Of guys to hit 79% of their kicks last season, Nick Folk is available, a former Tennessee Titans kicker. Yes, he is on the older side of things, but he made 96% of his kicks, was the top total in football. You also have Greg Joseph, the Minnesota Vikings kicker. Joey Sly, the Washington Commanders kicker. They are still on the market, and obviously Joey Sly is not coming back to Washington because they just signed former Jaguars kicker Brandon McManus. So I don't know what's going to happen at kicker, but at least if the Jags do want to go the free agent route, there is no one of note that came off the board today. Moving on to the next topic, we saw the writing on the wall here when the Jaguars signed Devin Duvernay from the Baltimore Ravens. You had a feeling that it was going to be the end of the line for Jamal Agnew. Duvernay, 2-year deal worth $8 million, 2-time Pro Bowler, 2021 and 2022, one of the best returnmen in football to start off the 2020s. Very good special teams player with the Baltimore Ravens. You can really see the emphasis the Jags are trying to make on special teams in this offseason. Dearness Johnson does have some special teams value. Tried to get a kicker. They re-signed Daniel Thomas, one of the best gunners in football, maybe the best gunner in football for my money. They get Duvernay, but it does mean Jamal Agnew is gone. We speculated this yesterday. It's official now. Jamal Agnew putting out a tweet saying, "All love for the real ones. Enjoying my time in Duval." Jamal Agnew, I'm going to miss you, man. It was the right move to move on. Obviously, the injuries, some fumbling issues every now and then, but every time the Jags needed a big return, he came up clutch. Every single time that they needed a spark offensively, they needed a good field position, he delivered when it mattered most. One of the most clutch players in recent memory for the Jaguars. There's a lot of guys like that where they might not have made too much of an impact on the stat sheet, but if you watch them, you know exactly the impact that they gave. Brian Walters, another great example of that. Didn't really do a whole lot, kind of a forgotten name in Jags history and NFL history, but he was money on third down. He was basically the Jags version of Wing Forbett during the Gus Bradley tenure, especially in 2015. I'm going to miss Jamal Agnew a lot. It's the right move to move on, but it's official. Jamal Agnew no longer coming back to Jacksonville. He'll be sorely missed. My guess is that he will sign somewhere once we know what's happening with the new rules. Right now, Jamal Agnew's value, probably not the best because of the injury that he suffered in that game against Carolina. And on top of that, we don't know if kickoffs are relevant or not anymore. We have no idea. Agnew way better at kick returning than punt returning, and kick returns were kind of irrelevant last year with how many touchbacks there were. NFL might be looking at changing the rules to incentivize more kick returns to make it not just a ceremonial play. They were not happy with what happened in the Super Bowl, where there were 13 kickoffs in that game between the Niners and the Chiefs, and none of them got returned. They were all touchbacks. If they change the rules, Agnew's value absolutely skyrockets on the free agent market. He won't be coming back in Jacksonville, but wherever he goes, I wish you the best of luck, unless it's Tennessee. I do not wish you luck if you go to Tennessee. But anywhere else, I wish you the best of luck, man. Thank you for 3 great years in Jacksonville. Thank you for being a Jags legend. Finally, the big news. Calvin Ridley still on the market. I said earlier today that when it comes to Calvin Ridley, no news is good news. The longer Ridley stays on the market, the more likely it is the Jags bring him back, because as a reminder, in that trade with the Atlanta Falcons, if Calvin Ridley is on the Jaguars before the start of the new league year in 2024, the Jaguars owe the Falcons a second-round pick. If he is not on the roster by that point, the Jaguars owe the Falcons a third-round pick. So what that means is if the Jaguars were to sign Calvin Ridley today, they owe Atlanta a second-round pick. If they wait until 4:01 Eastern time on Wednesday, that might not make it that obvious, but if they wait until 4:01 Eastern time on Wednesday, they only owe a third-round pick, and that would be absolutely huge because it essentially means you traded away Jawan Taylor for Calvin Ridley based on how the compensatory picks work. We got the third-round pick for Jawan Taylor when he left for Kansas City. We gave up a third-round pick for Calvin Ridley. I think that's a pretty good trade if it works out that way. I was very skeptical that Ridley's coming back to Jacksonville. You know me. I thought we completely blew our chances when we couldn't put the tag on him and when we didn't sign Josh Allen to a long-term extension before the deadline. I thought Trent Baalke mismanaged that situation. And the reason I said that was because the wide receiver market, Ridley's the best guy out there. Unless you're trading for T. Higgins, in terms of pure free agents, Ridley's the best guy out there. I thought he was going to get a lot of money, but the wide receiver market is kind of slow. Gabe Davis, Darnell Mooney, really the only receivers that have been signed to new teams for 8 figures. It's been a very, very slow market, weak market, but a slow market nonetheless. But the longer no news happens, the better. And I'm more and more confident that Calvin Ridley will be a Jaguar by tomorrow night. Few reasons for that. Number one, he changed his Twitter header to him in his Jaguars uniform. Number two, he's responding to a lot of fans on Twitter. He's responding to a lot of people. He's not staying media silent whatsoever. That's usually a good sign. Number three, you had a report that came out from NFL Network and Cameron Wolfe that said that Jaguars coaches are already salivating about the idea of Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, and Gabe Davis as those 3 receivers on the team. It seems pretty obvious they're the favorites right now after all of these reports today. On top of that, the Patriots made an offer for Calvin Ridley. The offer is still on the table, but Ridley has not taken the offer. You have to think, if he wanted to be a Patriot, if he wanted to leave Jacksonville, he would have done that by now. The Patriots apparently offered him a lot of money, but you had to figure that with the quarterback situation being very, very dicey in New England, we don't know who's going to be starting, what that situation is going to be. Is it going to be Jacoby Brissett? Is it going to be potentially Bailey Zappi? Is it going to be whoever they draft 3rd overall? If they do draft a QB 3rd overall, we have no clue. It's much more stable in Jacksonville with Trevor Lawrence. I cannot believe I'm saying that. The Jags are more stable than the Patriots right now. Never thought I'd say that in my lifetime. But that's basically the idea. On top of that, you have an insider that says the Jaguars look like they're going to get Calvin Ridley. This comes from a guy named Pretty Ricky 213. You might be wondering, who the heck is he? And I have no clue who he is. But I do know this. He called the Brian Burns trade before it happened. He called the Darnell Mooney contract with Atlanta before it happened. He called the Derrick Henry signing with the Baltimore Ravens before it happened. He's got the stamp of approval from Dilla, who's the Jaguars insider. He knows his stuff. Pretty Ricky knows his stuff. And Pretty Ricky said he's hearing Calvin Ridley compensation is at least $20 million per year, but still being negotiated. But it looks like he is going to be back in Jacksonville. If I had to guess what Calvin Ridley is going to do by Wednesday tomorrow, here's my guess. I'm up to an 85% chance he's back in Jacksonville. I'm up to 85%. I'm not really worried about New England. 2% chance for New England. I think he would have taken that deal by now. I know the offer's still on the table. Maybe they could increase it some more, but I highly doubt it. I think if he wanted to be a Patriot, he would have done that by now. The one team I'm worried about is the Kansas City Chiefs, because news came out today, according to Adam Schefter, that Patrick Mahomes restructured his contract with the Kansas City Chiefs to free up $21 million in cap space for the 2024 season. And obviously, the Chiefs need help badly at wide receiver. You thought they were going to be a favorite for Mike Evans. Looked like that was potentially going to happen. And then Evans goes back to Tampa Bay. It's a weak class in free agency. You figure the Chiefs are going to make a move somewhere. They're going to do something, especially because they cut Marcus Valdes-Scantling, which they had to do because of cap reasons. If you want to re-sign Chris Jones and you want to bring back Tranquil, you want to bring back all those guys, it was smart GMing. But the Chiefs are worse at wide receiver than they were last season at this point, which is absolutely crazy to think about because they're already terrible at wide receiver. The Chiefs have money now. The Chiefs have freed up money. I could see them putting in a last-minute offer to try and get Calvin Ridley. Although I will say this, 85% chance I think he's back in Jacksonville. If at 4 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow, Ridley is not on the team, it's very likely the number 0 jersey will be of use, and he will be back in Jacksonville. Solid season last year. Yeah, there were some highs and lows. 76 catches, 1,016 yards, 8 touchdowns. There were some drops. There were some missed routes, but he did get a lot of pass interference yardage that's not impacted in the stat sheet. On top of that, he hadn't played in 2 years. Now he is back in football shape, and if he was doing 1,000 yards after not playing for 2 years, I'll be very interested to see what happens now. especially now that you have a receiver in Gabe Davis line up on the outside. You can move Christian Kirk back into the slot in his natural position where he thrives best. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens with this offense. If the Jags get Calvin Ridley back, and I think they will, I am pretty optimistic about it. I was not optimistic at the start of free agency. I was not optimistic after we botched the situation with Josh Allen, but I am more optimistic now than I have been throughout this entire offseason that the Jags will bring Calvin Ridley back. And if they do that, when you add the Gabe Davis move, the Darby move, the Savage move, when you add the Morse move, when you add all that, I would say this was a very successful free agency period for Jacksonville as things stand. A lot of stuff they didn't agree with, Jonas Johnson potentially, depending on what the out is with the contract, the dead cap. The Mac Jones trade, don't agree with that. But for the most part, if they get Calvin Ridley back, this offseason is a win in my book. And Trent Baalke, you did a good thing. But what are your thoughts on the Jaguars? Day 2 free agency. Thoughts on bringing back Jonas Johnson? What are your thoughts on the Jaguars and the kicking situation? Where do you think Jamal Agnew winds up? And most importantly for Jags fans, what do you think happens with Calvin Ridley? What do you think the contract is? Short-term deal, long-term deal? Do you think he's a Jaguar? Do you think he's on some other team? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And that's going to do for this episode of JG9 News. Be sure you like and subscribe. It helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out my main channel, Jaguars9, where we talk all things NFL history all the time. Until next time, this is Jaguars9 signing off. And as always, go Jags.